Hi everybody, this is Dan Stolbarger. Welcome to this week's KFIR Middle East Update. It's the week of October 16th. And as you know by now, we jump right into what we call our news bites. But before I do that, just a reminder, get the PDF that accompanies this YouTube presentation. You can get that at our website at holygroundexplorations.com. Or it should be a link on the YouTube page itself that you can click. So, news bites. Facebook, and by the way, I just heard Twitter as well, announced this week that it will ban content that denies or distorts the Holocaust from their social media platforms. This is a reversal of a controversial policy that did not remove these sort of things previously. So a major victory in terms of Holocaust remembrance versus denial. Did you know that in Israel, this is no big shock probably, but only about 18% think that the Democratic candidate, Joe Biden, would be a better choice with respect to the U.S. policy on Israel. Trump is gaining, obviously, and Israel is a national hero, so this is not major news. Interesting that the Saudis continue to push positive messages towards Israel using its state-controlled media. And after decades of preaching that Israel was the enemy, we're now seeing that they're pushing a new message about the Jewish state. We'll have to still wait and see when. I don't think it's an if, I think it's a when they decide to join the so-called Abrahamic Accords. Big discovery in Israel this week. You can see the pictures here. A 2 shekel weight that dates back to about 2,700 years to the time of the first temple has been discovered near the Western Wall. And what this was used for is that there were not silver coins that were used during this time. So it was a precise measurement that was very important in trade. Men and women would carry weights like this around when they would go out shopping in ancient Jerusalem over 2,700 years ago. They used it to weigh out spices or food. You know, this discovery is once again strengthens the eternal connection between Jerusalem, the Jewish nation, Jerusalem, and the Western Wall. Remember, the Palestinians continue to deny that there was ever a presence of a temple or of Israel in Jerusalem. Mark my words, the greatest enemy of the Palestinians today is archaeology. So, amazing discovery. And if you've been to Jerusalem, if you go up above and you look down at some of those observation sites at the Western Wall, you'll see massive digging and archaeological sites that are being developed. And this is just amazing news. The COVID numbers in Israel this week, the health ministry announced that the number of positive coronavirus tests was the lowest since July, with the daily number of new infections nearing the 2,000 benchmark, below which authorities have said ongoing that once it drops below this number, the current lockdown measures will start to be eased. And so we're continuing to pray that the skies open. I heard Ben Gurion Airport is open today. And we're praying for all of our tours that begin in mid to late February through March, and we have one in May as well as November. We just pray that these trips would be able to be, quote, go. So please pray for our ministry in that area. Pressure on the Palestinians. The Palestinian Authority is reportedly under extreme pressure from numerous Arabs and European countries to resume direct peace talks with Israel. Those nations calling on Ramallah to return to the negotiating table, they include, among others, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, France, Britain, and Germany. And it just seems that Abbas is being cornered in all of this. And we're going to have to wait and see what transpires. I'm sure they're hoping and praying for a Biden victory. But again, Abbas has even come out publicly to say once the elections are over, the Palestinians will be ready to deal. We've heard this before, but we'll have to take a wait and see approach. With that being said, one thing that I've asked all along, whenever in Israel, when I'm among my Jewish friends, I've always asked, who's next? Not just in terms of Israel, who's the undercard? Who's the up-and-comers? Who's the replacement for Netanyahu or Likud? I've asked the same question in terms of who's next for the Palestinians. I've not gotten too many answers, but I found this today from the Shorsham website. It's essentially a person that's waiting in the wings as a successor to Abbas. Now remember, more than 10 years ago, Abbas announced that he would not run for president again, but he would stay in office until new elections were held. Taken a while. But this out, quote, this is from Jabril Rajoub, senior Fatah officials. We have agreed to hold legislative elections later this year. As soon as that statement was made, a couple days later, another statement was issued by a prominent Palestinian politician who's now living in exile in the United Arab Emirates. His name is Mohammed Dalan. And again, I don't have time to go into all of his background, but his quote was, I believe that Palestine is in urgent need of a renewal of legitimacy for its leaders and institutions, and this will not be achieved except through comprehensive, transparent, and national elections. This guy seems to be more of the wheeler-dealer kind of Trump mold. And so from what I'm reading, and we'll cover this again next week to give you a little bit more background, this may be the who's next in terms of the Palestinians. Now, Netanyahu, let's take a look at who's next in Israel. Yamnia is gaining. And so this party, Yamnia, and the last elections, they had 6 seats. Today, they now hold 21. And Likud has dropped about 9 seats from what they had as a majority. And so we're looking at Naftali Bennett and Aliyah Shalit. I'm not sure exactly how to say her name, but these seem to be the up-and-comers of the who's next in Israel. They are, obviously, they're on the right. They're not center-left, they're not left, and they're not far-right, but they plant themselves firmly in the right side of the government. Now, big news also over this last week, Lebanon, who still is in a state of war with Israel. Lebanon and Israel have agreed to meet together with mediators because, as I mentioned, they're technically at war, and they held unprecedented talks under the UN and US auspices to settle a maritime border dispute and clear the way for oil and gas exploration with, quote, reasonable time. There's a picture here for those of you that have been with us up to Rosh Hanikra. This picture will look very familiar to you because usually we always, this is a great place to pose for a picture because this is literally right on the Lebanese border. And as normal, it usually says no pictures allowed, and there's usually an IDF soldier there, a young boy, who usually waves us over, and we usually take our picture right in front of where it says no pictures. It's Israel. So anyhow, a couple things before we go. Did you know? Sobering news for us here in the States. Did you know that during the COVID lockdown, we have seen extreme inequities in certain democratic cities and states where abortion clinics and liquor stores can remain open, providing so-called essential services, while churches and synagogues remain restricted. In California, you can protest on the streets in large numbers, but you can't hold a Bible study in your home. You can shout at Black Lives Matter rallies, but you can't sing in a church service. In Nevada, you can operate a casino at 50% of the capacity, but if your church building seats more than 3,000 people, you can't have more than 50 in attendance. Did you know? These are the times in which we're living. Last thing, ISIS is rising. There's a photo here. ISIS is portraying the global pandemic as divine punishment upon sinful Western infidels, idolaters, and betrayers of Islam. Through a variety of media outlets, ISIS is preaching that the coronavirus is merely a soldier in the service of Allah, and it was sent to help them in their struggle to vanquish the infidels and spread Islam via the sword. In August, ISIS terrorists perpetuated more than 100 attacks against the globe, killing and wounding some 400 people. The Islamic State's scope of activity is increasing, with several dozen attacks in the very first months of 2020 to more than 100 per month through April and May. So make no mistake about it, this terrorist group has not been squashed. It is rising. Again, remember us in your prayers. The tours that we have that's coming up, we've just added another one in the fall. And so check out our website, holygroundexplorations.com. And I can't wait to once again get off that plane and be home in the land where it all began. Shalom. God bless you until next week.